Couture, more than any other fashion, is art. It should be thought-provoking and groundbreaking. It should be about something. But what really is it? Today I'll give you an overview about couture, the history of high-end fashion, and what it means today. Hi, this is Natasha Tuskevich, and I'm here to share my journey with you in the world of fashion. Please like and subscribe and hit that bell, and join me for more fashion talks every week.
So, what is couture? The word couture is a French word meaning sewing or dressmaking. The word couture has become associated with the concept of fashion design in general, and the concept of haute couture in particular. The etymology of the French word is from the Old French couture, from Vulgar Latin, Consutura, from the past participle of Latin, consuere, to sew together, from an assimilated form of com, with together, and suere, to sew. So you can see that it basically just means sewing, dressmaking. Considering the historical background of the term, it's not incorrect to use the word couture with any fashion brand. In fact, the term couture is widely used by both mass market fashion brands and custom designers to invoke a sense of style and luxury. But why? How did this come to be? Well, the word is now associated with and often used interchangeably with the term haute couture, even though they are different things. Haute couture, meaning high couture, is a registered term in France that only select design houses are legally allowed to use. These are approved by a dedicated commission run by the Chambre syndicale de la haute couture, the trade association of haute couture. This includes brands well known such as Chanel, Dior, and Givenchy. There are strict requirements, although these have varied over time. The term couture on its own is fairly misleading. It may be used to refer to haute couture, to all work from fashion brands that have a couture line, to all designer fashion, to fashion that is of the quality level of haute couture but is not officially haute couture, or simply to any brand that desires it. Now, while language does evolve over time, there are many people who are invested in maintaining the strict use of couture and haute couture. Personally, I feel that couture has slipped past that point, especially as it was never an exclusive term in the first place in French, whereas haute couture is holding strong to its exclusivity due to its legal designation in France. Now, what does haute couture look like? It's beautiful. The highest quality fabrics, workmanship, and detailing. The inside of the garment will be just as beautiful as the outside, and there should be little hidden details that only the wearer will ever see, just to make it more special. Everything should be well thought out. Everything should fit perfectly and be well designed. It should not hang weirdly or sag or fall. There shouldn't be any parts that are too tight or stretched or too loose. All of the seams should be finished immaculately, along with all the construction details. The interior of the garment should have support structures to ensure that everything stays exactly where it is intended to. The lining will be of high quality and finished perfectly, so no detail will be forgotten or overlooked. The materials themselves should be luxe and quality. Real silk and handmade lace, of course, but also new and interesting technical fabrics, new ways to dye or finish fabrics, new methods to cut or embellish. Extensive sequins and beading may be used. Haute couture is not only at the forefront of new styles, but of new techniques and technology as well. These houses have the money and the experts to experiment with groundbreaking options and to explore things that were not possible before. These styles and techniques will then filter down through designer ready-to-wear and eventually to mass market. Haute couture is where designers have the chance to get really extravagant, really luxe, and really artsy. Couture is, after all, inspired by art. Classic art, modern art, current art. Fashion is the entryway of new artistic ideas into pop culture. So how is it currently used? Well, everyone wants to be couture. Fashion labels abound with the word in their company name, and outside of France, you're unlikely to get into any real trouble. Even in France, the term couture alone is not restricted. And it sells. Customers hear couture and think high-end and trendy and French, and they want it. So it's understandable that companies want to call their label couture. Bottom line, technically anyone is free to use the word couture, particularly if you're doing high-end, custom, made-to-measure work, gowns, wedding dresses, etc. please consider if it really is the most appropriate, especially if you're doing mass market off-the-rack pieces, as you're likely going to get eye rolls from anyone in the industry, and you may be seen as entitled or out of touch. Now, haute couture, on the other hand, is more restricted of a term. If you're selling internationally, you might get into trouble in France, and you're definitely going to be confusing your market. A warning. Haute couture brands do not name themselves couture. It's somewhat similar to the phrase, if you have to tell people you're a genius, you're probably not. If you slap the word couture or haute couture on your brand, no matter how expensive or high quality, many in the fashion industry are going to consider you amateur and presumptuous. So, what are the modern requirements of haute couture? A popular misconception is that haute couture is hand-sewn or handmade. This is pretty misleading. Haute couture is not entirely hand-sewn. Haute couture uses sewing machines, and many other machines. As I said, they're often on the cutting edge of technology. Handmade does not equal hand-sewn. Handmade is not incorrect, however, most fashion today is made by a person sitting at a sewing machine, so it's not very descriptive of haute couture specifically. Hand beaded, handmade lace, or hand embroidered might be more informative for a particular piece, rather than saying handmade. Now, the requirements have been relaxed over the years as couture has become more expensive and with less market viability. While official figures are hard to come by, it has been proposed that the only couture house that still makes a profit directly from their couture line is Chanel. So, why do other haute couture brands still produce a haute couture line? Usually it's marketing for their other lines. They're ready to wear, yes, but the most profitable is their makeup and accessory lines. Selling $100,000 dress is great, yes, but selling 1 million bottles of perfume to everyone who wants to be part of the dream is way better. However, not every haute couture line is one of the household designer names. Many of the official houses are currently small houses from designers who typically studied with greats in the industry, either at the official school, the École de la Chambre Syndicale de la Couture Parisienne, the schools associated with the official trade association, or designers who worked for some of the big name houses. While many of these houses do sell ready-to-wear as well, some do not. Julien Fournier, for instance, does only haute couture one-off exclusives for his clientele. This is a very traditional mindset, creating clothing that is custom for discerning customers who desire exclusivity. And more than that, being a couture house is valuable to these brands, as they're regarded as the front lines in all trends. They are the utmost in trend setting, and everything else will filter down from their couture collections. So, what are these requirements? The original requirements from 1945 were 1. Design made to order for private clients with 1 or more fittings. 2. Have a workshop, atelier, in Paris that employs at least 15 people full-time. 3. Each season, twice a year, present a collection to the Paris press comprising at least 35 runs, exits, with outfits for both daytime wear and evening wear. At some point, now I couldn't find a date for this, so if you know, please leave a comment. At some point, the requirements were raised to design made to order for private clients with 1 or more fittings, have a workshop that employs 15 staff members. Those are both the same. New requirement, have at least 20 full-time technical people in at least 1 workshop. This doesn't have to be in Paris, however. And present a collection of at least 50 original designs, twice a year, of both day and evening garments. Now, in 2001, the required designs were relaxed to 25. Currently, the haute couture shows are twice a year in January, the spring-summer collections, and July, autumn-winter collections. These are outside of the traditional main Paris Fashion Week for ready-to-wear. Now, currently, the official website lists only these requirements. 1. You justify of a legal structure created for at least 2 years. And 2. You certify that the constituent models of your collection are designed and handcrafted in your own workshops. So, the relaxation of these standards means they're clearly looking to pick and choose exactly which houses fit their marketing and branding best to forward the interests of the French fashion industry as a whole. They are a trade association after all. So what does this mean? An important aspect over time has been the fittings. Fittings mean that the clothing is patterned directly for each client. A client can pick the design they like off their own way and have it made exactly for them. Often, they can customize and modify the design if desired as well. At the end of the day, a fashion house has to be selected by the committee who has the final say in who qualifies. So it's not just meeting the rules, it's being what they want to see. Now, the official members currently include, as of 2020, in addition to the official members, the Chambre syndicale de la haute couture officially invites guest members each season. They cannot use the term haute couture, but only the term couture, and can become grand couturier after 2 years. The Chambre syndicale also recognizes foreign grand couturiers who do not show in Paris, referring to them as membres correspondants. Mid-century houses. The couture house workrooms are carefully distributed according to sewing techniques traditionally. The sewing staff are divided between 2 areas, dressmaking, flou, for dresses and draped garments based upon feminine dressmaking techniques, or tailoring, tailleur, for suits and coats utilizing male tailoring techniques of construction. The staff work according to a hierarchy of skills ranging from the premier, head dressmaker or tailor, to the apprentices. The selling areas, salons, are equally controlled and run by the vendeuse, saleswoman, who sells the designs to clients and negotiates the fabrication and fittings with the workroom. So those are all very traditional styles of running a fashion house. Nowadays, it may be different and may range depending on what the house actually needs at any given time. Now I'll go over a brief history of the development of haute couture. I've taken a heavy focus on Chanel and Dior as they provide a good guide for what was occurring in the contemporary houses. If you're looking for a complete fashion timeline, check out my next video, which is going to cover all fashion, including ready-to-wear and mass market, as well as couture. This one is going to focus more specifically on just the history of couture. Now, a couturier was originally a dressmaker, i.e. a seamstress. Before we dive in, it's important to remember that while we now distinguish ready-to-wear from couture, this was not so clear in the past. Even looking at Chanel and Dior, for instance, labels that have been considered haute couture for a long time, they did not separate their lines this way in the past. These houses were selling in their own boutiques and selling to buyers from other stores all over the world. So while you could of course have a piece fitted and customized, you could also buy off the rack and the entire house was still considered haute couture. These houses still sell to buyers from high-end department stores, however, now their couture lines and ready-to-wear lines are separated. Couture houses would traditionally charge an entrance fee to wholesale and retail firms who would book in to see the collections. This fee would be scaled according to individual firms. Some firms went only to get an idea of the line. They bought the right to inspiration. They might buy a complete model gown as shown in the collection, or they might buy a toile in linen with the details sketched in with a sketch of the pattern, original sample, and trims. Haute couture timeline. Traditional dressmaking. Historically, clothing was made at home and by seamstresses. Fashion changed slowly over time and was very regional, especially for common people. The wealthy nobility in Europe had more access to styles that were popularized by courts and portraits. Textiles were traded, but rarely finished clothes. 1396, fashion dolls began to see use in Europe. 1642, fashion dolls became known as Pandoras. 1715 to 1785, these Pandora dolls became common and were used by seamstresses, milliners, tailors, and fashion merchants in order to illustrate the latest fashion trends. 1772, Rose Breton became Marie Antoinette's dressmaker, and her designs became so popular and widespread that they further built the popularity of French fashion worldwide. Now this was of course traditional dressmaking, as everyone's clothes were made to order at this time. Or, for the common people, the clothes were just made in the family. Breton herself often sent out Pandoras to show her designs. Late 1700s. Fashion plates were first circulated at the end of the 18th century in England. 1804. Louis Hippolyte Leroy provided the Empress with her coronation costume, which founded his career as a successful fashion trader of the Parisian high society. 1825 to 1850. paper dolls became an important purveyor of fashion information. 1858. Charles Frederick Worth established what is now considered the first haute couture house. Charles Worth is widely quoted as the father of haute couture. He was an Englishman who set up shop in Paris. After Worth became the favorite of Empress Eugenie, his business took off. Worth is credited with being the first fashion designer rather than dressmaker. Worth and his contemporaries, particularly Doucet, introduced innovations that have now become standards for haute couture establishments. They created luxurious Paris salons to which wealthy clients came, rather than the couturier visiting the patrons at their homes. They created artistic designs from which the clients could select and that were made to measure. They also employed live models, mannequins, who modeled the designs for private individuals. Thus, the haute couture system of luxury dressmaking production was born. All told, Worth was instrumental in the development of couture and the concept of fashion design, as well as the use of labels and the concept of logos. 1860s. To differentiate from unauthorized copies, Worth began to incorporate a house label into his products, carrying the Worth name and address, either stamped or woven into garments. This signature label became a defining characteristic of 20th century fashion. 1857. Bazaar was founded as one of the earliest continuing modern fashion magazines. 1868. Charles Worth founded the Chambre syndicale de la confection et de la couture pour dames et fillettes, the trade association for couture, clothing manufacturers, and tailors for women and girls. This will eventually evolve into the modern association that regulates haute couture in France currently. You'll see more of them coming up. 1868, the first ready-to-wear department store opened. 1880s, the term haute couture was officially established in French in writing. 1892, Vogue magazine was founded. 1890 to 1895, this was the first printed use of the term ready-to-wear. 1895, first printed use of the term fashion designer. 1896, the French luggage company Louis Vuitton, founded in 1854, first began to use its monogram in a repeat printed patterned canvas, an early indicator of the power designer logos would come to wield. By 1897, clients of Worth could order a garment by phone, by mail, or by visiting a store in person. In the 1900s, ready-to-wear began to be popularized. At the beginning of the 20th century, apparel manufacturing in the US was a fledgling industry, originally based around corsets, bustles, and outer wraps that were easy to manufacture for multiple sizes. However, these firms expanded dramatically after 1900, due at least in part to the popularity of shirtwaists. 1901, the designer Poiret worked for Worth. 1902, department stores began to feature knockoffs of their couture creations. 1903, the Ehrlich brothers decided to bring the best of French couture to their department store in New York. They had women wear the designs for the audience, giving the world its first fashion show. In 1903, Poiret established his own house. 1908, the phrase haute couture was used in English print for the first time. In 1909, Chanel opened a millinery shop. In 1910, the Chambre syndicale de la confection et de la couture pour dames et fillettes became the Chambre syndicale de la couture parisienne, trade association of Paris fashion. In the 1910s, many designers began using the fashion show as a promotional vehicle. By 1913, Chanel had shops offering prêt-à-porter sports clothes for women. During the First World War, European fashion was affected through the scarcity of materials and the mobilization of women, as well as the production of uniforms. By this time, Chanel had opened a large dress shop in Paris and had many different types of ready-to-wear clothes available. 1918. The couture industry had fixed dates for 2 major shows per year for the foreign buyers that were coming to Paris. The runway fashion shows became popularized at this time, put on by both department stores for their customers and designers for industry buyers and direct clients. By the 1920s, designers had a set routine for fashion shows that started by showing sports and day clothes and moved into evening wear. This routine would continue well through the 1950s. In 1921, Chanel established her first perfume, Chanel No. 5. In 1924, Chanel introduced her first costume jewelry and makeup. In 1925, the introduction of the concept of prêt-à-porter has been attributed to Sonia Delaunay after her exposition at the 1925 Exposition Internationale des Arts et Décoratifs in Paris. In 1927 or 29 or 30, I couldn't find the specific date, l'École de la Chambre syndicale de la Couture was established. This is the school that's associated with the Chambre syndicale. In the 1930s, Elsa Schiaparelli was the first to create themed collections, including circus, commedia dell'arte, and astrology, among others. These themes added a theatrical flair to her shows. They incorporated music, special lighting, and dance into the presentation. In 1938, her circus collection included circus performers who jumped, skipped, and flipped all over. So you can see that she was an early lead for the types of shows we get a lot today, where designers put on crazy and exciting things to make it all interesting. In 1932, Chanel presented an exhibition of jewelry dedicated to the diamond. This featured the comet and fountain necklaces, which are still popular today. In 1937, Chanel had expanded its clothes to more women and presented prêt-à-porter clothes designed and cut for the petite woman. In 1939, there were 70 official houses registered with the Chambre syndicale. During World War II in Spain, the Cooperativa de Alta Costura was formed in Barcelona. In 1942, the Incorporated Society of London Fashion Designers was formed in England. In 1945, on January 23rd, the legally registered designation of origin, haute couture, was established, along with the first specific requirements. The Chambre syndicale de la couture parisienne became the Chambre syndicale de la haute couture, the trade association of haute couture. At this time, haute couture was divided into two classes, couture and the more prestigious couture création. A haute couture house had to apply for membership, which was reviewed annually. The application made for the classification couture création covered several areas, at least 25 designs created in-house, spring and fall, and made up on a live mannequin. The collection was then presented in an appropriate setting located in Paris. The rules also covered the technical execution of the original models, the repetitions to be made in-house to clients' measurements, the number of fittings required, and at what stage in the making and the sales of the designs. At this time, fashion shows were also formalized into a calendar that all French houses followed. Made-to-measure clothes became the norm, and it was standard practice for houses to sell their couture designs as paper patterns to clients, seamstresses, or boutiques. Industry buyers from department stores would commonly go to shows to perhaps buy particular pieces, and also to gauge what pieces they could reproduce themselves, steal, or be inspired by. By 1946, there were 106 officially registered haute couture houses. Also in 1946, Christian Dior founded his own couture house. He'd previously worked for the Swiss couturier Robert Piguet and in the studio Lucien Lelong, alongside Pierre Balmain. In 1947, haute couture was flourishing. Dior released his New Look collection, which was insanely popular all over the world, and this style dominated as the iconic post-war fashion style for over a decade. In 1948, Dior established a luxury ready-to-wear house in New York. In 1949, Dior launched Diorama. By marketing Dior stockings in the United States, the brand also created the licensing system. In 1950, Dior licensed neckties, and soon all accessories followed. In the 1950s, the post-war years continued, and this consolidated the pre-war situation where the economic basis of the houses was shifting from private sales to commercial buyers. The large market for haute couture became as a design source. Their designs were copied and adapted to limited editions or line-for-line copies. The process began in the 1930s, as well as for mass market fashions. Haute couture houses sold the original models as well as patterns, all of which was regulated by the Chambre syndicale. A couturier's design was usually first created in inexpensive muslin called a toile to perfect the design, cut, and fit. These toiles record the exact cut and sewing techniques and include samples of the interlinings, linings, and the fabric required in the final garment. Paper patterns were also used to replicate designs. Increasingly, couturiers opened boutiques within their salons in order to sell less expensive versions of their haute couture lines, as well as accessories. a development begun by Poiret in the early 20th century. In 1952, there were still 60 haute couture houses. In 1955, Chanel launched her iconic quilted leather handbag. The name for this bag is still 2.55, as that was the date, February 1955. 1955. At age 19, Yves Saint Laurent became Christian Dior's first and only assistant. They launched Dior lipstick and a line of beauty products. In 1957, Christian Dior succumbed to a heart attack. Yves Saint Laurent was named to provide the continuing artistic direction for the company. 1958. To fight against the trend of ready-to-wear, Jacques Heim, the president of the Chambre syndicale, launched Prêt-à-porter Création, creation ready-to-wear, in order to sell special models intended for serial sales. This was directly aimed at international buyers and press. It ceased when ready-to-wear collections by couture houses became firmly established. A few years later, the couturiers themselves launched Prêt-à-porter des couturiers, couturiers ready-to-wear, in order to stand out from industrial ready-to-wear, which used less expensive materials, simpler shapes, and above all had less prestige. In 1960, Yves Saint Laurent was called for national service and left Dior after completing 6 collections. By 1962, Yves Saint Laurent opened his own couture house. In 1966, Yves Saint Laurent was the first couture house to make a freestanding prêt-à-porter boutique, Saint Laurent Rive Gauche in Paris. Other couture designers were not far behind, as couture was already becoming less profitable. In 1967, Dior created the first women's ready-to-wear line in France, Miss Dior. By 1970, there were only 19 official haute couture houses. In 1973, the Chambre syndicale du prêt-à-porter des couturiers et des créateurs de mode, the trade association of ready-to-wear couturiers and fashion designers, was founded. On the same day, they founded the Chambre syndicale de la mode masculine, men's fashion, and they created the Fédération française de la couture, du prêt-à-porter, des couturiers et des créateurs de mode, the French Federation of Fashion and Ready-to-Wear Couturiers and Fashion Designers, which is the organization comprising the 3 trade associations, and they run Paris Fashion Week. In 1973, Paris Fashion Week began in its current form, i.e. a week of shows that's held every 6 months in Paris. Haute couture is held 2 times a year in January and July, menswear in January and June, and women's wear in March and September. These dates are determined by the Fédération Française. 1978. The House of Chanel started their separate ready-to-wear line in 1978, after Coco herself had died in 1971. By 1996, only 18 official houses were left. In 2000, this was down to 18, and in 2002, at the time of Yves Saint Laurent's announcement of his retirement, there were 12 houses left. By 2004, only 9 were left. Chanel, Dior, Givenchy, Gaultier, Lacroix, Moru, Sirot, Scherer, and Tarrant. By 2006, there were 10. However, in 2006, this was the first instance of correspondent and guest members. If this began earlier, someone please let me know. In 2017, on June 29th, the Fédération française de la couture de prêt-à-porter des couturiers et des créateurs de mode was shortened to the Fédération de la haute couture et de la mode, and this still comprised the haute couture, the women's ready-to-wear, and the men's ready-to-wear associations. Present day, in 2020, the number of houses has fluctuated over time. You saw it drop way down below 10, and originally jumped all the way up over 100. Now it's currently quite healthy, as they've included guests and foreign houses, and changed the requirements so that it's not so much about meeting specific goals, as it is about actually presenting interesting and groundbreaking fashion that moves France's fashion interests forward. Especially as Asia, the Middle East, Russia, etc. have begun to rise in wealth, they've become interested in spending their money on exclusive luxury fashion, and haute couture has begun to take off again.
Woo! Lots of technical organizations and fiddly details. Now, this was mostly researched on Google from other fashion articles that had absolutely no references. So if you know any of information that is different, please let me know and I'll update the description. The references I did find are posted below, and check out the post on my website for more of the details if you're actually looking for the detailed information. For a complete fashion timeline, please check out my next video, What is Ready to Wear and Why is it Different from Couture? I'll be going through a complete history starting from pre-BCE all the way up to modern day, and the history of how fashion actually is produced and distributed. Thanks for watching. I hope you now know a little bit more about couture. Subscribe to join me every week for a new video. I'll see you next week.
Stay tuned for a quick flip through of the collection you just saw being drawn. Okay, so this is the final run through of the collection. Number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, number 7, number 8, number 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, and 35.